everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in to day 2 of our language masterclass. I'm here again today with my colleague Laura. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Thank you for being available for us again today. And today, let's just get going immediately. We are on to challenge number 2, which is absence of an immersive environment to learn a foreign language. Now, this is a topic that is very close to my heart because I really wanted to be bilingual. So after learning English at school in my beautiful but very rural area of France, and I touched that yesterday, where the learning could take place at school in a very textbook style learning environment, but there was no immersion whatsoever. So yes, I agree. An immersive environment can truly be key of a beautiful linguistic development, but not all the time. So today, I really just want to demystify this idea that unless you go and live in the foreign country, you can't master the language. And the other idea that's a preconceived idea of saying, oh, I just need to go to the country and then I'll be fine, is totally wrong. And it is close to my heart because after high school, I went straight to the US where I was an au pair. By going and work out there and living with the family and looking after children where my native language, French, was never spoken, could I improve my English? Of course I could. Absolutely. And the immersion factor is the secret sauce that will add a huge amount of flavor to your language recipe. But there's a few ideas around that I really want to put on the table today and discuss. What you really need to understand around that is the secret ingredient is the idea of contextualizing the learning. You can go and live in Spain or Italy for years and come back in a no better linguistic shape than you currently are. If you do not live in an Italian community, if you never communicate with people in Italy, if you don't get involved in your community, if you don't immerse your brain by reading the local newspaper, if the TV is in English all the time, if you work in English, if you socialize in English, then let me tell you, then going and live in a supposedly immersive environment is not going to work. As some of you may know, we now have an office in Florida, in the south of Florida, very close to Miami. Every time I fly over and I get into a taxi to then go to my hotel, 9 times out of 10, I try to communicate in my very little Spanish with taxi drivers who don't speak English. Some of them have been in the country for 20 years. But contextually, they are still in a Spanish bubble. And that's really what I would like, with the help of my colleague Laura, talk to you about today. Being in an immersive environment is wonderful. And beyond improving in your target language, if you can live in an immersive environment, whether you do it here in the UK or you go abroad for a short or long period of time, it's transformative, but for you, for your personal development as well, culturally, linguistically, it's brilliant. There needs to be rules, okay? I have met someone when I lived in Manchester, a French guy who had lived in the country for 8 years. And I was kind of fresh out of university. And when I started to hang around with him, going to the pub and meeting English friends, I realized the limitations that he had to fully converse. And I then realized that whilst he had lived in the country for for many, many years. When he first arrived in the UK, he had no English. So, of course, you know, his English was great compared to what it was like 8 years ago. But whilst he had lived there for many years, he still couldn't get a good job. He still couldn't speak or write without making horrendous grammar mistakes. And that's because he was constantly immersed in a French language, personally and professionally. So for me today, it's about saying to you, hey, when you say to me, oh, I won't go to France, so the chances of me ever speaking the language, you know, is very slim. Or when you say to me, oh, that's okay, I'll go and spend a year there, go and live there, and I'll be okay. Yes to both of these, but with certain conditions. So, Laura, why don't you just take over and talk to us about the idea of being immersed in the language, but also the whole idea around authentic language, which is what I believe people are seeking to understand when they talk about an immersion.
Definitely. So we know that immersion works really well under the right conditions, as we said. And the reason for that is because it's so input heavy. It means that you get so much exposure to the language. And in particular, you get so much authentic exposure to the language. When we say authentic exposure, what we mean by that is real language in real context, used by real people in the real way the language is used. We have all seen those kind of textbook sort of language that we get when we're learning a language. And anyone who has read a textbook and read through the dialogues and then gone and tried to speak like that in France, in Spain, wherever you are, know that the dialogue doesn't go as predicted in the textbook. It's a really good place to start, but it's not real language. It's not authentic language. If you turn up to the bakery in France and you sprout exactly what you learned in your textbook, just about going to get there, but it's not real language. It's not really how we use it. So the reason that authentic exposure is so important. So remember, when we do an immersion, we get huge amounts of authentic exposure, which is why immersions are good. So the reason that authentic language is so important is because it really reflects the social use of the language. So language doesn't exist by itself. Language only exists with meaning. The only reason that we speak is to convey meaning. So that means that when we learn a foreign language, we need to learn how it is used in the context to convey specific meanings. So this is really important for us to really understand the real way that language is used, and not just these kind of robotic sentences that we might learn and spring out and that we don't know how to reply to if someone doesn't reply the exact sentence we were waiting for. And also, it means that if you are having lots of authentic exposure to the language, you're going to really understand the rhythm and the tone and the pace of the language, which is something that's hugely important. Have you ever listened to one of those AI-generated robots where you write in the paragraph and they speak to you and it comes out in a really robotic voice, even in your native language? You've heard this and it sounds wrong. It doesn't sound right. You can just automatically tell that it's a robot because the intonation isn't in the right place or something like that. That shows that even in your native language, the intonation that someone has and the rhythm of the language, the tone and the pace is so important. So that's why it's important to have this authentic exposure when you are learning the language. And also, when we listen to authentic language, it means that we get a much wider variety of vocabulary and of grammatical structures. And that wide vocabulary is really important because the language that you learn is dependent on the language that you are exposed to. If you aren't exposed to a wide variety of language, of grammar structures, of vocabulary, of accents, then you aren't going to learn all of those different things. So it's really important to have that authentic and repetitive exposure, and also to have the variety of language structures and of vocabulary that you hear in real authentic language.
Great, thank you very much. So what would you say, or how would you advise people who are watching this masterclass today so I suppose there's a couple of advice that we can give everyone listening to us today. The number one is, how do you immerse yourself in the language at home? And perhaps, so, you know, if you haven't got the opportunity to actually go abroad, and perhaps I can touch up a little bit on the immersion programs that we are organizing abroad, whether they are adult programs, cultural and linguistic program, retreats that we also organize, kind of intensive weekend retreats, or those that we do in England and the US. And I can touch up on them and explain what we look at and the objective to really help students. But perhaps you could give us few examples of the best way to create this immersive environment, even without going very far away.
Absolutely. So if we think about what we spoke about yesterday, and I gave a long list of resources that are available to us. As we said, now in 2024, we have never had access to so many different resources ever in the history of language learning. So at the moment, if you know what to look for and you know how to look for it, we can find so many different authentic resources. So again, these are the podcasts that we were speaking about. These are the books that we were speaking about, TV shows. And again, when we're looking for authentic language exposure, the important thing is to remember to not just look for materials that have been created for language learning. These are good. These are the textbooks. These are the Coffee Break podcast. These are all the different books that are created. The translation books. We have the English on one side, the other language on the other side. All of that stuff is important, but in order to really master your target language, the important thing is to find these authentic materials. These are materials that weren't created for language learning, but that were created just for interest in whatever the topic might be. Podcasts, books, TV shows, as we said. And it's about finding these and bringing these into your daily life. As you mentioned, I know people who have gone and lived in France for a year, who have lived in Spain for a year, and who have come back and haven't really actually learned very much of the language, because while they were in the country for a year, maybe they, as soon as they were home and they closed the door, then they were just watching TV in English, or they were just doing all this stuff in English. They lived with English housemates, for example, or they would, go to university for the day. And while, their lectures were in French, so maybe that helped a little bit, they were just hanging around with English people all the time, so they were just speaking in English. So while going abroad is obviously really great, the important thing that we can do is make sure that we have exposure to the language by deliberately bringing it in to our daily lives, whether we are abroad or whether we stay in the UK. And this is just, as we said, using the internet and using different resources to bring it into your daily life.
And I would like to add as well that I know that this is the topic of one of the days during this masterclass on, understanding that it's a normal process to make mistakes. In the same way, when you immerse your brain in the language, as you quite rightly said, when you immerse yourself, you absorb the language as a whole. It's not structured, it's broken down, it's not explained to you. It's, hey, this is, you're watching a film and you get all the story of the films with, the nuances of the language that go with it, the different vocabulary, maybe, tenses that you had never heard before, anything like this. It is extremely important to tell yourself, when I'm immersed in the language, there's a huge amount I want to understand. Immersion and control of the language don't go very well together. I have learned English technically since I was 11. I am 47. And I still watch films where I don't understand every single sentence I hear. I can still read a newspaper, like here in the UK, the Times or the Guardians, which are, can be quite tricky to understand. And I still want to understand all of it, nearly 40 years later. And the truth is this: if you think I'm going to immerse myself in the language, but I'm getting frustrated because I don't understand all of it, then take immersion out of the process. immersion should be really enjoyable, you know, but you need to highlight, you know, we often here in the office talk about a bath, like a French bath or a Spanish bath. You know, it's very much, there's loads of things floating around in the target language. There's loads of things that you don't know and don't control, but that's okay. We could do a whole masterclass for those of you who like science and how the brain works on where all that language goes in your brain. We'll touch up a tiny bit on that, I think, on day 4 or 5. But really completely remove the idea of control when you're trying to be immersed in the language. But I promise you that it works. After 25 years of living in the UK, I still, on a regular basis, say words I didn't know I knew. I will talk about something and a word is going to come up. And my brain has now been immersed long enough. I'm not saying it takes 25 years. And, you know, is confident enough that I will say words that I've clearly heard somewhere, but I didn't know I knew. And that is the beauty of the immersive factor.
It's the same with language structures as well. Recently, Natalie was in the office while I was teaching, and I was explaining to my student at the time the difference between, so it was a French student learning English, and I was explaining the difference between when you say something is more expensive compared to cheaper. So the difference between how many syllables it has. And so anyway, I was explaining this to Natalie, not to Natalie, to my student, when you add ER on the end or when you say more. And Natalie comes in and said, wow, I never knew that. Even though Natalie has been saying the correct form for probably 25 years.
Yeah.
But that was something that you had learned through exposure and that you had no idea of the actual official rule of it, but there was something that you know and that you picked up on. And that is how you learn through exposure.
Absolutely. And what was really important for me today is to say, you can grab a little bit of the immersive factor with many different resources. You know, Laura touched up on podcasts. We run 2 podcasts. Please go and grab them. You know, one is called French Conversations with Natalie, for those of you who are learning French. Another one is called Tea Time with Natalie, for those of you who are learning English. There are plenty out there. What I'd like to finish on today is to actually talk about residential programs. So it is fair to say that if you have some structure in your learning, if you have clear objective and you are part of a language organization, going abroad to practice the language is a great idea. But again, there's a couple of things that I'd like to demystify. Number one, it doesn't have to be super expensive, okay? We at Vici run weekend retreats in France. They are very affordable, so you do not have to break the bank. They are an educational investment because there's a real structure to it, but they can be a lot more affordable than people think they are. Number two, you don't need to already learn the language in order to go. Because let me tell you, we have run residential programs like 6-7 days. We've got one in Valencia in March. It's a language and cultural program for 6 nights, 7 nights. We have a weekend retreat in France. And when we look at the people who come and those who benefit the most from it, let me tell you, there isn't one particular profile. So what we hear a lot is, oh, I'll go but later when I can already get by and master the language fairly well. It's not necessarily right for you. I have seen a lot of people going on one of these programs abroad at the very beginning of their journey with us. Why? Because that gave them a huge boost. It really opened their brain to welcome the learning that they would subsequently do in class, because it gave them a real boost of confidence and it gave them huge motivation. By being in this immersive environment, it really clicked and they just went, right, you know, I really want to do that. When I come back next time, I will get by very well. And sometimes it is for people who have come to a certain level and maybe feel that they have reached a little bit of a plateau. Actually going and live that language experience abroad, their brain is kind of reigniting with the language at that time. And that is really, really helping them. So we've seen a lot of different profiles of people. When we have people from Europe coming over to our academy in the UK to do a residential program, or to our office in the US, it's again slightly different here. For a lot of them is working on particular skills to get to the next, their next career path. For teenagers, sometimes it's simply saying when they come back, I can be bilingual. I didn't think it was for me. Now I've discovered it is. So different residential programs for different student profiles. What I would thoroughly encourage you to do, if you were thinking of investing time and money into purchasing any type of residential programs, I've been running them for the best part of 10 years. So if I can help, please come and reach out. But it's a little bit like everything in your language learning journey. The results can be amazing. You need to plan. You need to know why you are doing it and what is the outcome and what would be the best option for you, the best package that you should choose. There can be, I've seen students getting so much out of it, but I've also had students saying, I've been on this immersive program before and, it was a great social adventure, but I didn't progress very much. So again, the immersive factor is absolutely key. Do a little bit of homework beforehand. And happy to help with that. So anything else that you would like to add, Laura, as we are about to conclude day 2, and how to overcome the lack of immersive environment to learn a foreign language?
That was everything from me. Just really to hone home on what we said about the importance of not of knowing that you can bring the immersive experience to you as well. It's not something that you have to spend a lot of money and go out to a different country and spend time on doing as well.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you, Laura, for today. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in to watch day 2 of this language masterclass. We shall see you tomorrow. And I can already tell you that challenge number 3 is one that I know a lot about as a language learner, and that is the lack of a regular routine when you are trying to learn a foreign language. So thank you once again, and we will see you tomorrow for a bit more advice on how to learn a foreign language. Take care. Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.